Our imagination of the world that we're building, that's what needs to be informing the way we're reimagining our, quote, legal agreements with each other, because ultimately we need agreements.
Welcome to Learning Lab, Ma Earth's online community, where we're sharing tools, skills, and resources in service of planetary health and regeneration. I am our facilitator, Sophia Rocklin, and we're creating Learning Lab as a learning environment for different land stewards around the world. So folks who are helping to regenerate and revitalize their ecosystems and their bioregions. We thought we'd start Learning Lab with a conversation about land itself. So we invited Cassandra Lynn Ferrera, who is the co-founder and program director at an organization called the Center for Ethical Land Transition, which is based in California's Bay Area. And Cassandra is bringing her background in real estate and helping to facilitate the equitable transfer of land, and offers just like a wealth of different frameworks to understand how it is that we work with land and relate with land, and how we relate with ourselves, moving beyond ownership and towards reciprocity and kinship and long-term care. The Center for Ethical Land Transition is also helping to facilitate land back and rematriation initiatives in Turtle Island, also known as the United States. So we warmly welcome Cassandra Lynn Ferrera of the Center for Ethical Land Transition and you to Learning Lab. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here with you and also be your first Learning Lab. So hello to everyone who I can't quite see, but I feel you out there, and I understand that you're calling in from all over the world, which is really beautiful for me to imagine too. I am sitting in Coast Miwok and Southern Pomo lands in Northern California, Sebastopol. I live in a community called Landwell community that I have been co-stewarding here for almost 9 years. And it's definitely an important place of community and land practice for me. I have been a real estate agent for 20 years. Not something that I thought that I would have gone into, but some of us get assignments, as I'm imagining some of you listening have had, where you get assigned to go into a corner of the belly of the beast. And in that aspect of it, we have the opportunity to understand how it works, and ultimately help reimagine how, in my case, land transitions work. So I feel super honored to have very purposeful work. I have many elders, both human and non-human, that have guided me, and I'm in deep gratitude to them and to the land for being ultimately my guide, and as a real estate agent, my boss, ultimately the land. And so with all of that gratitude, I am looking forward to sharing with you about the Center for Ethical Land Transition, because it's been an incredible opportunity to bring a depth of understanding about how the industry of real estate has transacted land, to be able to bring translations of that into movements that are centering Indigenous sovereignty, all sorts of incredible diasporic Indigenous communities reuniting with land, and ultimately all of us coming into right relationship with land. So I am going to take you through on a slide journey, and I hope I said enough opening remarks that to at least contextualize myself a little bit. I am obviously of European settler descent, and my family lineages have been part of the settler colony called the United States for very different levels of time, and some going all the way back to the 1600s. So it's a very nuanced and complex journey to be such a deep have such a deep love and respect and awe and desire to reunite with land with that positionality. So it is what it is, and all of us from all of our places. And I'm imagining you and people in so many different situations, all of us coming into that through all these nuanced lineages into community, cooperative stewardship, and back into sacred relationship with land. So I am going to come through some slides now. Okay. So we just titled this From Ownership to Kinship. We titled this, I'm actually not exactly sure how this beautiful title came to be, but I love it because, and I love all the words of regeneration. One of the deepest things I feel that we need to regenerate is this concept of ownership. And obviously it's been placed on top of the land from a colonial mindset for thousands of years and is really entrenched in our systems right now. And so it's going to take generations of healing. So we need to have a long vision. It's not just in our lifetimes that we're going to be doing this work and restoring kinship with each other and with our places. It's definitely a long game. Okay, this slide is not true, but it does. The current legal fiction is that land is divided and privately owned, seen as an asset, commodity, object. Sold, traded, bought and sold for the highest bidder, by agents who are speculating on their clients being paid a real estate commission, and not bad people, most of them, but, caught in a system and ethics regulated by the Department of Justice and the state real estate departments. This is this incredible legal fiction that, at least in this country, we live inside of. And I think it's so important that we see it as a legal fiction, because we need to know that we are really in the story, and we are now helping this story be written and reimagined. It is not a foregone conclusion, of course, just because it's this huge edifice that it has to be this way. It must be regenerated. Otherwise, we're ultimately playing capitalism at the ground level of many of our regenerative projects. And I don't say that as a big, too big of a push, but I do want to push us to get to those root levels of reimagining cooperative stewardship. So in real estate, in most countries, and certainly in this one, it is like, you got a land that needs transition. There is a well-worn highway, and here is the on-ramp, and get on it and get yourself an agent and get going with, the program. And even really cool, awesome people who are trying to do things differently often don't know how else they could do it than this very well-worn pathway. And so we imagine that we're going off trail. And here's kind of in the image on the right is a nice trail we're heading into. Hopefully that's what it's slowly looking like now, because we've been starting to walk. And it's not just one, it's many trails, but ultimately they're bringing us into the landscape. They're bringing us into the land, so that we can listen and have those relationships actually inform how we're transitioning land. And so, we're a nonprofit program through Commonweal, and we are providing technical support. So we get in there and do real estate strategy and think through all sorts of, we join what sometimes is called a technical bench of our clients. But basically we're deeply listening to what are the cultural reunions that are actually seeking to happen through people going off trail and into land. And I'm going to say more as I move through this presentation about what the Center for Ethical Land Transition does. But very much, we're trying to slow down these processes. Real estate, conventionally, is filled with so many false dualities and urgencies, and obviously massive amounts of inequity. And so how do we slow this process down? How do we come in with listening, like I said, cultural sensitivity and really hoping that people who are transitioning land aren't getting having to get more harmed through the process. And sometimes that is part of it. And so there's processes of repair. So much of this is about repair all along the way, repairing relationships with each other, repairing relationships with the land, and ultimately creating lots of transformation and more access to land from the tremendous enclosure that private property has created. So ethical land transitions. What are ethical land transitions? There's so many things. We are learning with everyone that we support. Every single land transition has its own unique situation, of course. The land itself, what the land's journey has been, what the history of relationship with that land has been. What we're doing is we're recontextualizing the whole process. We're bringing everybody into the story, and certainly the folks who are coming into stewardship, their stories. Whether it's a rematriation project of Native tribes, or it's a other indigenous diasporic community that's reuniting, what is their story? So ethical land transitions are ones that are really bringing in healing, bringing in repair, understanding that we're existing inside of a context that we are actually seeking to hospice while we're helping to give birth at the same time to reimagined and more rooted ways of relating with our sacred earth. So, like I said, we give transactional nuts and bolts support, deep relational process. I don't really do agency work anymore. It's all about accompaniment and cultural strategy, navigating through. And more we're seeing that it's not just the land transition itself, it's also the preconditions and the post conditions, of course. How is it not just from one thing to another? How could it be any other way that it actually takes a lot of time? So we're getting more and more interested in what are the preconditions for land transitions, as well as what does it take after folks reunite with the land. Oh, then the story really, really deepens and needs a lot of support. So I'm going to bring you into our compass. This is originally was born out of trying to get out of the buyer-seller paradigm and really help us all get that we're all on a journey off trail into right relationship with land. So we orient in the North, all of us coming into right relationship with land. What does that mean? That's like a personal process that each of us have, learning how to listen, how to make offerings, how to recognize who we're allied with, who's supporting us, coming into our own kinship journey. That's a part of it. But then, of course, we have to reinvent how we come into agreements with each other. Lots of projects take title to land as 501c3s, and they feel totally constricted and hemmed in by that legal form. Or some other communities will, if they don't need to get tax deductions, they'll take the whole title as an LLC or something. There's these very limited options that people have, and we've been hacking them for decades. Probably I'm in good company here. How do we do this? But really, we don't need to just be hacking a legal system that already exists. One of my favorite attorneys, she says we need to sci-fi is actually our better source code for our legal agreements that we need to create for the future, like our imagination and our thinking of a time beyond our own and our imagination of the world that we're building. That's what needs to be informing the way we're reimagining our quote, legal agreements with each other, because ultimately we need agreements. We need all sorts of ways that kind of help us understand the container that we're in. So we see that as in the North, it's we're orienting and we're always heading in that direction. And that's the orientation. And of course, inside of that is equitable access. So helping to heal the wealth disparities that late stage capitalism has created, where I am, over 90% of rural lands are owned by white settlers. So that's kind of an intense percentage to be working with. So there's a whole lot of folks who have been displaced, and that colonization and racialized capitalism really made access really, really not only challenging, but riddled with violence, trauma, and harm. So the North is also really about how do we heal that, and how is that reflected in our bioregional stewardship? So in the East, everybody's rising in the East because of how the Earth turns. So in the East, we're seeing that as like, what's on the rise? Well, our reunion with land is on the rise, and with culture is on the rise. And that's what the Center for Ethical Land Transition is sends a lot of our solidarity support to, is that cultural reunion. And I'm going to share a little bit more about this, some stories about that in just a few minutes. But folks that are been systemically oppressed by the title holding systems that we've created, really supporting, we stand in a lot of solidarity and support with those land transitions. And in the West, there's this process of relinquishment. So it's not like reverse colonization that some people think like, oh, all the white people got to leave and relinquish their land and go. Nope, it's not a dualistic process like that. We don't need to be afraid. We don't need to like cling and hold every Indigenous person that I've worked with and talked to are like, we know what it's like to be kicked off. We're not kicking people off. We just want y'all to behave as good guests and really show up in deep solidarity with care for the land. And so relinquishment isn't our support of title holder relinquishment. Sometimes it is really specific. Like somebody is very specifically holding title to land and they need help letting go. And we help facilitate those relinquishments. And in best case scenario, they're at the table. They're 100% knowing that this is a process that they're willing and wanting to engage in. And the beauty about this, that the West and the setting is that there's a lot of relinquishment that we all need to do, because entitlement and control and enclosure happens on lots of levels. And it's an emotional and sort of ego structure thing too. So we feel like there's something for all of us in the reunion and the relinquishment in coming into right relationship with land. So that's a really, it's like a deep meditation, right? And it's a structural realignment at the same time. So that's another thing that we do. And often like working with title holders can take years and of education and helping people understand their land legacies, so that then they can realize, okay, what is enough for me or us, and then what can we relinquish? It's gonna take some time. One of the things we also do that we feel like is super important is to convene. So we convene. We've helped create in the last couple of years some really beautiful convenings. This year we're going to be convening practitioners, land justice practitioners, and so getting together and learning in that south part of our compass is and supporting the work that people are doing is a huge part of what we see as important for the long haul. Is who are those in between people, those facilitators and bridge builders and people that can see all this and with the nuance that it deserves and the non-dualism that it needs. How do we support those practitioners in developing so that this multi-decade process that we're in can be served by people with technical experience, real estate agents, attorneys, fundraisers, finance people, planners, all of the above and more. So in the center of the compass, all the time, that's the transformation, right? Where all of this comes together and we see the different aspects of what we're all up to. And we gather around that fire and we learn together. We share stories. And that's also something that we're learning how to do more like now, like right now. We're gathered around this fire that Ma Earth has created. And y'all are listening to my story. And hopefully I'll get to hear some of yours. And in that, that warmth that we're creating through our stories, we help see the new world that is being birthed through all of our actions. So I'm going to go through this one more time in a different frame in which it's not so much a compass, but it's really around reframing our relationships and language, where we realize that like in all of our land transitions, ultimately land is at center. All of us are having this relationship with our home, not just our physical home, but home of earth and our place of belonging. All of that is activated for all of us. It's a central relationship. Our relationship with earth and land is central. So I totally dig that this is you're start with land. That's how we see it. And so yes, there might be a transition from title holders to those who are in reunion and rematriation, but it's also a transformation. I mean, ultimately, those folks are having to become title holders now themselves. And usually they're going through a massive transformation in that cultural reunion. So it's just important for us to continue to just see this not as somebody walking away and somebody stepping up. Like this is multi-level transformation that's happening. I've kind of already gone through this, the examining your legacy, looking at where it is to relinquish entitlement. I would say here at Landwell, where I live, one of the ways that we see our relinquishment of entitlement is to create something that is not just for us, to do the hard work of putting the land into trust, creating a limited equity housing cooperative, and transforming really expensive real estate into something that serves the community now and into the future. So I think we need to think out of the box of what relinquishment often looks like. Like it doesn't necessarily mean selling or walking away. It might look like, wow, what positionality do I have? How can I contribute to this transformation? And how does that ultimately also bring me into right relationship with land? And so, in my case here, part of that is relinquishing what some people might consider like a chance to get equity in the real estate market. Yep. Totally relinquished that. Also relinquished a lot of volunteer time to help build new infrastructure. Yep, could have been doing something else, could have been making money doing something else, doing that. So there's different ways that we need to be thinking about this that center our values, right? That isn't just about the money, obviously. It's about the center, the land, all of our belonging, and all of us gaining ground. It's important that we're, folks who have been systemically marginalized need to be supported in gaining ground with their full dignity and leadership and voices intact. And there's a truth that all of us come into integrity through this work of reuniting our ethics, our values with land. Again, facilitative roles who help this process throughout time. Okay, a couple stories from the field. And I do want to say it's really important that I'm going to talk about 4 different populations of communities that we've served in through the Center for Ethical Land Transition. But it's so important, like every group is really its own unique group. I'm going to name certain racial aspects. Every team is actually a multiracial team. There's no monolithic situation that I'm trying to portray in what I'm about to say. and there are patterns within them. So in the Campesina-led land justice projects, it's really close to home where I live, literally, and also born in California, the Central Valley, all of these farmlands that grow, like industrial agriculture, grow all of our food, or most of it, not all of it, but a lot of it. Are being worked by folks that are, I would suggest, they're currently one of the most, if not the most oppressed class in California and in lots of agricultural communities. And so the process of centering land justice for campesino communities is it takes years. It takes years. There's language justice that's involved. Generally, there's local governments that get involved in the projects that we've been serving. And then most importantly, there's community-led groups and for those who don't know, campesino or campesine in a gender-neutral term is a self-proclaimed title that subsistence farm workers claim for themselves. And so that's something that is just been an incredible process to serve these communities in acquiring land for farming for themselves, for their families, ultimately with goals, of course, for creating community infrastructure and housing as well. And of course, you can go to I have a slide about that, but there's more stories on our website. It's a super joy to work on Black land-led liberation projects. It's some of these pictures, obviously I'm in one of them with movement generation folks, and that was a very multiracial group, but also really centering Black and queer liberation and in an urban context. And down below there is Yeye Louisa Tish having an opportunity to support her landing a site for the Jambalaya School. And so working with these folks and again, just like deep solidarity. They're all teaching me what solidarity looks like, and super honored to join those teams. And of course, rematriation projects. The Nisanan here pictured on the right, the picture on the left is of Winnemem Wintu. This is really deep honor work to get to all of it. As honorable as you might imagine. To have the opportunity to stand a lot with Indigenous women leaders who are leading their communities, and some of whom, these two don't have federal recognition for different reasons, and yet their process of rematriation and how they're leading their communities back into their land, it's an incredible experience. And there's several other communities that we have the opportunity to work with. And really you might imagine it's pretty helpful if you're a Native community having to deal with buying back your land, that having a real estate agent and a team of attorneys and folks who really are getting what you're, not as much as we can, but centering their journey and kind of like making the other things like work around what the rematriation project is about. I could certainly say a lot about that. And there's more stories again on our web. So this is a cool photo of from a gathering that happens annually through Land Justice Futures, in which Catholic sisters are examining their legacies of boarding schools and participation in enslavement, and they are being super brave because it wasn't any of these Catholic sisters who actually did those things, but they are taking accountability for their order and really leaning into ministries of repair, which is beautiful. So getting an opportunity to serve that, I mean, the Catholic Church, which is the largest private title holder on planet Earth right now, second to the non-private royal crown of the of Britain is the first largest title holder. But if the Catholic sisters can be engaging with local Native communities and working on examining their land legacies and engaging in solidarity and repair, it kind of feels like anything's possible. It's really beautiful work. So, like I said, we also host convenings because getting together and talking, there's nothing like it. We share a lot of our stories at that Central Fire on our website. So come visit us, join our newsletter, stay in touch. This is the incredible team I have the opportunity of serving with. We're a small but mighty team. And just really honoring Jason, Neha, and Abby. And I think that's what I've got right now. I'll leave it there with a big thank you. Hopefully that was stimulating and you've got some questions.
Wow. I have questions. I think the chat is alive and active. Hey, everybody. Cassandra, thank you so much. And I feel like we could probably talk about this for days on end. And I know that in this group right now, in this lab, we have a number of people calling from different land projects around the world. I'm seeing some, they've been maybe at the beginning of their stewardship journeys, maybe they're inheriting land. So I wanted to open this time up for any kind of questions or reflections. And dear listeners, if anyone has any kind of curiosities about, your own land project, what are some kind of, some questions you may have, some concerns you may have? What are some kind of things that are coming up for you as you're listening to Cassandra's presentation? Cassandra, I'm also curious if in general, maybe I'll start with a question. Let's say, I'm a somebody that's interested in buying land, right? I'm a white woman and I have a little generational wealth in my pocket and I'm going to go and purchase land. And, I've heard you talk about different frameworks for language, actually. And, we're still talking about land and functioning with land very transactionally. I've heard you talk about, ownership versus in making offerings to land. And I'm curious just from a linguistic perspective, because our words make worlds. What kind of language do you offer to folks that are in this process of obtaining land, right? Or kind of beginning their stewardship journeys wherever they may be coming from? I think a lot of folks who have the opportunity to purchase land are also happen to be culturally orphaned in a big way, where we've lost a lot of our relationship and right relation with land. So from a language perspective, do you have any insights there?
Well, sure. I mean, from a language perspective, but maybe also even from just some engagement, perhaps ways of looking at it. You didn't hear me in that presentation talk that much about sellers or owners. We do just use the somewhat neutral term title holder because that's what you're doing inside of a legal system that is propped up, sadly, by the doctrine of discovery and colonization, and that's the way it is right now. like it's not that I said at the beginning. We need to play the long game and know that we're working to change this, and some of that language can help change our minds. And so, and of course, I have to code switch all the time. And you're buying land. Sounds weird. Like we can't own lands. We can't buy land. Shouldn't be a commodity. But it is something that you're hopefully going to do, because one of the ways of looking at it too is that you as someone who serves a movement, you having a secure and direct relationship with land is also a beautiful part of what I would imagine is like a transitional ecosystem in which there's going to be times when privately holding title to land is part of the process. And so it's important not to make that wrong or wear a bunch of guilt about it. It's just what's so right now. And so for you to be embodying that, and when you go to make an offer, because in real estate, you make a purchase offer, a purchase contract, make sure that you have made an offering to the land. Make sure that you have actually, has something that can help transmit your prayers and interests in becoming a steward and of that place. That's a way for sure that we can begin to establish other communication lines, and for you to make an offering through the trees, through the waters, and asking for permission to be a steward of that place. And then of course you become hopefully a very good steward and start listening to all the beings and helping them thrive and flourish, and listening for opportunities within your community to be part of healing and repair within where you live. And so some of the language is, very much watching out for the depth of transactionalness, because it will stimulate your nervous system into that more fear-based fight or flight. There's nothing like a real estate transaction to activate your nervous system into fight or flight, because that security root, you're yearning to actually belong and situate yourself in place, is strong. It's you who knows what your lineages have held, but I would just also really suggest opening up to those deeper layers of what that means to you, so that the transaction doesn't dominate your experience of reuniting with place.
Whoa. Yeah. Thank you for that invitation. We've got a number of questions trickling in here. Katrina asks, I'm curious about the role of nature communication in this process. How often is it the land itself at the table? I've started working as a nature communicator, wondering how that role fits into the ecosystem of this work.
Oh, what a cool question, Katrina. Thanks. And I'm curious about the nature communicator. Many lineages, of course, have practices in which they make offerings and listen, and then receive guidance from their different allies within the natural world. And those of us who are of European descent have various degrees of capacity. I mean, any descent, but like various degrees of capacity, but especially those of us who have had such, for me, my lineages were broken, like all from the place way back. And so, but I came into this earth feeling super compelled into direct relationship and a receiver of direct guidance from trees, and other non-human beings. And so I feel like the role of nature communication is essential. One of the projects we work through is a rights and nature based project that actually stands up guardians where the land isn't owned at all legally, but the elements of the ecosystem are the associators within that quote legal framework, and all of those people who stand in for as sort of legal aliases for the ecosystems, all of them need to have roots into listening. And it's not a one and done kind of thing, right? Like it's a learning process. So if you have that skill, then I would imagine that would be something that you could offer to people who are asking, like Sophia, is this the land for me? And Sophia goes and stands next to the tree and the land where she's considering making an offering. And maybe you could help her know. Maybe that could be a service you could provide in that way. Maybe you already do. But I hope that we all become nature listeners, that we all realize that and I think here it is, that we're on a journey of finding who's talking to us. Because so for some people it's the birds, some people it's the grasses, some people it's who's talking to you, and opening that and not being shy to like reanimate that relationship. Oh, I know what the other thing is that we also straight up write like trees into our agreements with each other. Like there's certain conversations we can't have here at Landwell without going and being in the grove and opening up a listening portal to the trees. Like we don't trust ourselves as humans to have certain conversations without that direct physical guidance and presence of those elders. So that's another thing that sparked in your question. Thanks.
Nice line of inquiry there. We have a question from Hans. Hans asks or says, amazing work and really nice presentation. I wonder which levers there are on policy and advocacy levels. So how might you work with local or state politicians and government?
Thanks, Hans. My early activism days, I was more involved in local governments. And I kind of got frustrated with how slow they move. And it's a really important piece that you're bringing. And it's also something that the Center for Ethical Land Transition is getting involved with. So Abby and Neha are working with the Spatial Futures Fellowship Program through Policy Link. So there's exploration of policy happening there. I've been asked this year to join a California initiative through the Strategic Growth Council that's about land access, specifically for Indigenous and the diasporic Indigenous farm worker populations. So I'm reluctantly serving on a task force specifically getting into policy interventions that would, like, for instance, one of them that we're suggesting would allow that if a federally non-recognized tribe was holding title to their land in a permanently protected way, that they would be released from county zoning codes and be able to steward that land consistent with their cultural practices. So sort of like a native land overlay on a zoning level, one idea. There's so many different policy interventions that are possible with regard to helping to loosen up funds, help loosen up government-owned lands, return and repatriate government title-held lands. It's a learning curve for me because my experience is so much like hands-on and direct with the people and the land that when asked to participate in that on that policy level, like I said, I can get a little frustrated with how slow it moves, but it's super important. So I appreciate you bringing that question, and definitely I'm getting more willing to be involved with that for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Dustin Freita from Taos, New Mexico asks, how many Native Americans are working with you at the Center for Ethical Land Transition?
We don't have Native folks on staff. Meaning neither Jason, Abby, Neha, and I are not from an Indigenous Native tribe, but we work with a lot of Native folks. So I kind of like couldn't even keep count and I don't try to. We're currently working with a program that is helping to build local Native community here in the North Bay. We've worked with the Winnemem-Wintu tribe. We've been with them for about 4 years as their real estate strategist. I work with the Owens Valley Indian Water Commission in Payahunadu on rematriating their first 5 acres, and now we're going again. Once one happens, and once the trust and is built and the system is there, then we tend to keep going. The photo of the Nisenan folks, which are the Nevada City area in California, we've been working with them and continue to do so. I'm like, wait, there's even more. But I hope I'm and lots of partnership organizations too. One of the things that we're also working with right now, and not me, Abby is leading this, is Black and Native solidarity, which is, of course, a really rich and sensitive and deep dimension. So yeah, I feel like I hope I answered your question, and maybe if there's something more about the spirit of it, I would be happy to say more.
Great. We got a couple more questions for you. So Susan says, hello, appreciation for this conversation. Can you share a bit about land trusts as a mechanism for rematriation? So again, say a bit about land trusts as a mechanism for rematriation. And there's also a curiosity about how we might be able to combine your approach with capital allocation, which we know is quite broad of a topic, but maybe we'll start with that first one on land trusts as a mechanism for rematriation.
Thank you. So that's a kind of a big question, because you could take it from one angle of land trusts that are already holding title to a lot of lands, participating in rematriation. So for instance, go check out what's happening in Maine through the Wabanaki Commission and First Light Learning Journeys. They are transitioning tens of thousands of acres from existing land trust stewardship into returning it to native stewardship. That's one way land trust is just by full-scale relinquishment. Another way that land trusts can be helpful with rematriation is sometimes by being a transitional title holder. So sometimes groups are getting this. It didn't happen with the land trust, but it worked with a different way with the Winnemem Wintu. But sometimes there's a need for an intermediary title holder, like somebody's ready to let go of a piece of land, and a native group is interested in coming into stewardship, but isn't quite ready with their own entity yet. Sometimes land trusts can play really powerful roles using their capacity to be an interim title holder. Maybe more to your question, land trusts, if you, Segorite Land Trust, which is another native group that we've worked with, to the other person's question. And I'm also wanting to name the incredible Hawaiian groups that we're working with, particularly Lama Lama Ka'ulu. And the Segorite is a 501c3 community land trust. And in an urban context, that's really working well as far as I know for Segorite. But it isn't always like the way that the board structure has to be isn't always conducive to cultural stewardship. So, for instance, Lama Lama Ka'ulu, a native-led land project, they have their land in a 501c3, a land trust is a 501c3 with a stated mission. So for some folks that can work fine. And I honestly think that we need to reimagine land trusts like at scale. And if there isn't a culturally aligned land trust that can hold title to multiple lands in a particular region, I kind of think that could be something that could be very helpful, especially with regard to other bioregional efforts that are underway. And maybe to your other question about capital, like moving capital, a land trust, I think, can be a really beautiful tool. They're also part of our sacred contract program because we need land trusts to hold rights of nature easements. So land trusts are very interstitial still at this point, even with some of the limitations that can come with the 501c3 board structure. So I'm kind of a fan of land trust innovation and iteration as part of our large scale strategy right now. Okay, that was a lot of things.
We're here for it. Well, we are eclipsing on our time. But I am curious, Cassandra, what is the best way, if you're on this call, you're a land steward, you're an ally, you're aligned with the greater movement of land regeneration, rematriation, becoming human again a little bit more every day. What's the best way to get in touch with you, reach out, and what are ways that we can collaborate? What are kind of the avenues for collaboration and building bridges and cross-pollination with your organization?
Beautiful. Thanks. Well, most basically, certainly you get on our mailing list, and we send out a quarterly seasonal newsletter and an annual report. And so if you want to hear from us, basically 4 or 5 times a year, you can certainly do that. We're having that practitioners gathering. So if you are a practitioner or know practitioners that would love to gather and learn with other practitioners, please drop a line at our it's info@ethicallandtransition.org, and drop a line about practitioners. If you are a title holder that is interested in participating in an ethical land transition, either releasing stewardship at there's different ways that you can do it that aren't, we understand that people often still need a financial compensation. So there are ways of doing that where you give time, participation, willingness to engage, that and still the land could be purchased. That's something that we may or may not be able to help with. It depends on location and our capacity, but certainly reach out about that. If you are a group that is in reunion or seeking reunion or in that process, we are building a resource hub. Actually, we're building a resource hub for everybody. So if you're interested in a resource hub, do get on our mailing list because we'll let you know when it's ready. But we are compiling a lot of resources, and because of our just incredible network of folks that we've had an opportunity to work alongside, I think it'll be pretty robust. So we have at least resources for you, and we might be able to join you. It depends on, again, our capacity. But and by join you, I mean join a transition team and help facilitate and bring that technical, generally real estate strategy, how to navigate through sometimes one transition, often multiple land transitions, because that's just kind of what it's taking right now. And I think that and in collaboration, if you host events, if you would like more to hear more and connect more in the way that we have today, that's also something that we do. And then I think lastly, for specific learning, sometimes we are able to kind of tailor a presentation really into a contextual situation to help catalyze something happening where you are. Okay, I think that's what's coming to mind right now.
Thank you so much, Cassandra, and thanks to your team at the Center for Ethical Land Transition. If you would like to stay in touch, join our mailing list where you can find different tools, resources, and episode updates. You will also be able to find today's show notes as well as links to the awesome work of the Center for Ethical Land Transition on our website. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time in the lab.